We're waiting for the chat.
Okay. I was just talking to my kids about chat.
Yes, she can hear
Yes,
and see you. Perfect. All right.
we're in business. Perfect.
I'm
Perfect.
feeling good
Great.
about this.
Great. So where I left off, just real briefly, because this is going to be mostly like going through building stuff, but it's probably worthwhile taking a little bit of time to understand some of these gotchas with Next.js. So old way of doing things, you have your React app, create React app or something like that. You have an API layer, probably a different service app in itself that's like Node Express or Python or Java or C# or whatever. And you interface with this backend that might interact with a database. So for an ecom app, you might say, hey, API, give me all the products from the database. And then the API would give it to you, and then it would return it to the React app, and you'd render all that on the screen. The cool thing about Next.js is it really gets rid of the need to have a separate API layer. So now you can have it all in one place, directly query your database, and also use React. And there's this idea of server-side components, and that is an interesting thing, because if you think, what can you do on the server that you can't do on a client side and vice versa? So certain things will not work as you expect them to, which is some of the gotchas that we're going to see as we build a full stack Next.js application. And a real briefly, very quick, dirty explanation of CSR versus SSR, client-side rendering versus server-side rendering. All your files will come from some server sitting out there. So you get some HTML and JS files from a server and a client-side rendered app, and we'll get this HTML files, JavaScript files. The JavaScript will create maybe some more requests and do JavaScripty stuff. It'll interact with the window. And as you might know, a window is available on the client in the browser, but it's not available on the server. So maybe you'll do things like, if you're using React, you'll maybe use state or use effect, or maybe you'll do something to generate more data dynamically and then build that page up. The problem with this model is that you end up, sometimes the page isn't fully rendered. So you get like a shell of the HTML, and then you'll get some JavaScript, and that JavaScript will then kind of create the rest of the page. That may take a millisecond, or 500 milliseconds, or 2 seconds, or even 3 seconds. And during that time, if Google decides to have a little robot crawl on your page and say, hey, what's going on this page? What's on this page? And it doesn't see anything, well, it's going to bounce. And then it doesn't know how to tell people what's on this page. So it says, I see a little bit of HTML, but I don't see the rest of the page. I'm going to bounce, and I'm going to tell people that all you have on this page is, a title or something like that. Not great for search engine optimization. Along comes Next.js, and server-side rendering is not new, but this is the default way that Next.js likes to serve your web pages. So it fully renders all the code on the server and sends you a fully fleshed out HTML document that the browser can read and use. That's it. So it says, cool, we're going to just render the whole thing for you and then send you the entire page. So now you're ready to show the customer, the users, what's on there. There's some big pros to this, is that now when the bot comes on this page, when it goes to the page now and looks at it, it's like, oh, great, now I see everything on this page.
Nice.
The one potential issue is that this takes a little bit of time. So that first initial load, when a user first gets there, can be a little slow, because this way, in this model, you're getting the HTML just like the skeleton, and then it's like fleshing out the page. In this model, you get the whole thing. So there's pros and cons, and one is not always better than the other. So it's just a trade-off of what to do. Next.js decided, hey, we're going to opt in to use this model by default. And we're going to see what that means when we start actually building a Next.js app. So let's actually build some stuff, because that's what I typically find to be the most helpful thing to do.
I'm so excited.
Yes, nice. And I'm assuming some things for people listening that they have like NPM installed and things like that. Like they know a bit about how to use NPM packages, Node Package Manager. I'm going to create a Next.js app really, really simply by doing npx create-next-app. And I'm going to call this coding with, is it Callie or Callie?
Callie.
Callie. Okay, cool. Coding with Callie.
What's the difference between NPM and NPX? I never knew that.
Oh, this is an interesting one. So NPX will not only download it, but will execute it. So it's like X for execute. So it's not just going to like get this thing, it's
Oh.
going to actually like build the thing for us. So actually, I already have a project called Coding with Callie because I was preparing for this. So I'm going to call this Coding with Callie again. And I'm not going to use TypeScript just for the sake of not adding more variables to how I could mess up. I guarantee I'm going to mess up a little bit building this in front of you. So I'd rather not add script in addition to that. And for people out there that might not know TypeScript, I'm making the assumption you probably know some JavaScript if you're following along with this. So this gives you a bunch of configuration you can use. I would just say the only thing you really want to follow along with is no to TypeScript. ESLint or Tailwind, yeah, sure. I'm not going to use an SRC directory. That's totally up to you. But if you want to follow along exactly, it's probably easier if you do not use the SRC directory. Do we want to use App Router? Yes, we do want to use App Router. Next.js had a couple versions ago where they changed the way that page-based routing takes place. And you don't need to worry about that, but we're just going to say, yes, we're going to use the App Router. Do we want to use TurboPack? We're going to say yes. Again, this is one of those things, this configuration, you don't need to care or know much about this thing. It's a way to speed up local development. Do we want to use the import alias? No, probably not. It's going to install this for us, and it's pretty cool because we're going to have a working app. I haven't used Nest.js for a while, but I know it has like a cool command line interface tools, right? Cool tools you can just scaffold like API routes really quickly, right?
Yeah, I love Nest. I'm going to say mix up Next and Nest so many times today.
I know.
But yeah, Nest is like my go-to if I'm going to write a backend with TypeScript. I always use Nest.
Yeah, that's actually what my introduction to TypeScript really a few years ago, and we were using Nest, and I was a little bit confused by it, but once I got into it, I was like, oh, this is really cool. It was fun to use.
I think when you're doing a simple project, something like Express is enough. But like if you're starting to like add a lot of services or like have more complexity in your back end, then having something that's super modular is great.
I need to watch some of yours because I definitely forgot everything I know about it.
That's fair.
So here we go. We got Coding with Callie again, and I'm going to just open this up in VS Code. However you do that is how you do it. What the heck? That's not the right place. Dropped it in the wrong place. Cool. There we go. Make this a little bit bigger so people can hopefully see it. And what we're going to do, I'm going to open up my integrated terminal in here, and I'm just going to run the app. Let's just do yarn dev. You can do npm dev. I'm using yarn dev. We'll run this in dev mode. It'll start the app up, and we can see what it looks like off the bat. And this is the cool thing I think about Next in general. It's like you can get a working app really quickly with something cool to look at immediately. So here's what the Next.js app looks like off the bat. Pretty good looking already, right? And by the way, I'm going over lots of things you could find in the Next.js docs. They're really, really good. So I totally suggest you read the docs. They are super helpful. And I think that they go much more in depth than I can go here. We're just going to build something pretty small. So a little bit of a tour of Next.js, just a quick tour here. Package.json is your configuration file. It basically includes all the different packages, all the libraries that are needed to scaffold this app. And you see there's not much here right now. There's React and there's Next. It's kind of it. We have some other things like Tailwind CSS. We have like just some dev dependencies, but really this is just a house. This Next.js app we're using here is a house to put our React into. So we can use React here. We can write React. We get all these cool Next.js features just by virtue of using the Next.js library here or framework. And this is kind of interesting. When this builds, like this is at the end of the day, this is just HTML and CSS and JavaScript. There's nothing like crazy going on here. It eventually compiles to that. And you can look at how it compiles by looking at the chunks here in the JavaScript and the server files here, and it does some caching on your behalf and other things like that. So this is actually what gets output to the web. So if you build this and want to deploy it, your actual build, your HTML and all the other stuff will be output to this .next folder here. Now here's what we actually care about. We have the app and we have something, CSS. I'll get to the layout soon, but here's the real like heart of the application. This is your entry point into writing the code at page.js. So let's go to page.js and you have what looks like a typical React component. Export default function home. And it has all the stuff we see here. Let's go ahead and just like nuke this whole thing. We're just going to nuke the entire freaking thing.
Nice.
I'm going to get rid of all of it. Everything between the return statement, at least. And we're going to do your typical, hello world, just something lame, just to start. Hello worlds. And and they see cool. Looks way worse than what the original one looked like, but hey, it looks, it's something to get started with. So I'm going to get out a class name here. Text to XL. And if you don't know Tailwind, don't worry. I've been using Tailwind a bit at work, so I know a bit about how the Tailwind classes work. Tailwind is super cool. Gives you just a bunch of pre-composed CSS you can make by adding a class name, and then it automatically will add styling to it. Kind of like Bootstrap, but a little more intuitive in many ways. So we have the hello world, and now you may be thinking, or maybe you're not thinking this, but maybe you should. You think, hey, what if I wanted to have more than one page in this app? We have, right? And if you're using Create React app, you used to have to add more libraries and stuff like that. You'd have to have like a React router library.
I always use React router.
Yeah, everybody did. That was like the only thing you could use.
Oh my gosh, am I outdated? I'm officially old.
No, it's still the thing. I mean, it's still like you have to use it. So with Next, you don't need to use anything. And here's one of the first gotchas you'll come across. So we're going to build a ecom app. And one of the things an ecom app will have is a products page. So we want to create a products page. The way you do that in a Next.js app is like this. You create a new folder at the app level. So under app, new folder. The folder is going to be called products. The name of this is very important because this name will inform the route name.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right? Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And here's the next really important step. The file you put under here has to be called page.js. If you don't call it page.js, Next.js doesn't know to serve this particular page at that route. And we're going to make this, and then we're going to do export default, and you can name this whatever you want because this is a default page, so you could name it whatever. You can't export. Here's another bit of a gotcha. You can't export const. You must export default. That is what the Next.js engine expects you to export from any page file. Everything else is fair game. You can have named exports, you cannot, but a page must be exported as a default. So we're going to flesh this page out because right now we're still, building something pretty simple here.
Are you going to show us how to get data? Because that's like my first question. I was like, wait, but if I need data from my database, how am I getting it?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, we're definitely we're gonna create an API route within this app that's going to do just that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And so now we have our home page, we have our products page, and we go to products, and we should see products. Boom.
Yeah.
We have a multi-page app. Now, I'm not going to get because in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too far into dynamic routes, but I think it's worth at least understanding how dynamic routes work within Next.js. So if we want to have it's not uncommon that you have a product page and then you want to click on an item and then go to that particular item. Like you might go to item at ID 1 or whatever, right? So the way you do that, a dynamic route would be to have another folder with these brackets around it. And I'm going to call it ID. You can call it cats. You can call it dogs. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to put ID because that makes sense. I'm going to put ID and put a new file. And you can probably guess what this will have to be.
Page.js. Nice. All right.
I knew you could get it. And we're going to export default. Export default function product page. Why not? Doesn't really matter, but we should always name with something that makes kind of some sense. And this is cool because you can actually get the parameter from here. I think this will work. And if we console.log ID, we can just see, does this work? Let's just see. Product page.
This feels much easier than React Router.
Right? It's so much. It's like, what? You just boom, you're already there. Product page at ID. Okay, didn't quite work the way I wanted it to, but that's okay, I guess. I thought it was going to just show me the ID right here, but
that would have been nice.
It would have been nice, and I bet I could probably figure it out, but let me see. Object. No. This is okay. Yeah. I'll let you all figure that out on your own, how to get the ID from here. It is pretty simple, but this is also a new version of Next, and I don't know if what has changed. This is version 15, which is really new, by the way. This is the newest version of it. But we have pages, we have dynamic pages. Now we probably want to get some data, and I'm just making sure I'm going along here. Cool. Actually, let's create a simple. We did create a simple component. Actually, let's actually create an API endpoint here. Let's do something cool.
It looks like you can use params.
Oh, okay. And let's see. Const params equals use. Oh, that would be actually with this one. Const params equals use params. Okay.
So then maybe params.id then.
Params.id. Let's see. Can we do it? And this will also actually show a kind of an interesting thing here. If you notice, where is this? Let me see. Params ID, and let's go to. Oh, look at this. Look at this. So
it only works in a client component.
Like, we rubbed up again. It only works in a client component. Did you notice something odd? That when I'm console logging ID, let me get rid of this actually. When I was console logging ID, where's that console log showing up? It's showing up in my terminal here.
Oh, because we're doing server-side rendering?
We're doing server-side stuff. All these components by default are server-side. So you have to opt into using client-side. You don't opt out of it, which is weird. Everything is server-side by default. So we want to do something client-sidey, like use params, for example. We have to do this, and we'll see this come up again shortly. Use client. Now we can actually do it. So if you ever get yelled at there, the simplest thing, and look at that, products page 1. Thank you, Callie. Yeah, look at that. 2, 3, and cats. Boom.
Yes.
So, excellent. Now we're cooking. And this, by the way, is how you get rid of that error. If we erase that just for the purposes
how does that impact like data loading and stuff like that? Or like, is there anything that like, I mean, I guess it has to be client side if you want to use the params though, right?
Some things but you can do other things. You can do like headers, and you can get the ID from the headers potentially. You can look at the URL and do other things. But I know that there's a server side way to just get the slug from here. I'm just blanking on it for now, but there's like multiple ways to do it. You can usually do a lot of things like that, client side or server side. So now the data part, because we have this products page, but the products page doesn't have any data at all, and we want to get that. Now, if we had like a database set up or something like that, we could actually, because this is on the server side, we could do something like this. We could like await DB. If we had like a database, we could do like db.get, products or something like that. And we could just straight up do that here, and that'd be fine. We don't have a database connected yet. So we're going to go a little bit more traditional way of doing this, something you're probably kind of more used to seeing when you have like client side versus like a server side, two different apps that communicate. Because this is a server-side framework, really, you can add your API routes within the app. So a common convention, like we could do this, API. And then we could have an API that has a products route. Again, this follows the same convention where these are routes. Like, so this will inform how the route is constructed when we want to query the data here. And then under this, we're going to make a file, and it's going to be called route.js. This is important as well for the naming convention. It lets us know, hey, this is an API route. This is not something I'm going to serve as a page. This is a server-side route that I need to be able to support.
What would the use case be to add a route if you, like, instead of just going directly to the database, if you're doing server-side rendering for your page?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes, and this is like the most obvious one I can think of off the bat, is that sometimes you have a client-side page and you can't do that. So like, for example, this page where we're using use params, there's no, you can no longer, because you're using client, there's no way to do like db.get, you know, whatever.
Right. Okay, so it would be if you're using server-side rendering, you can just go to the database. If you're using client-side, you'll have to create an API route then.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's kind of one of the things too that's a little frustrating, I think, with Next or React in general, that there's not like a standard, like if you use Rails or something, there's kind of standard ways to do everything. And with Next.js, you can go off the rails. You can do these weird patterns and like that. There's no like single way to do it, which I kind of find frustrating, but it also frees you up to do a lot of cool things. So here is a weird, I'm going to try to do this off memory. When you make a route, you have a few different types of routes, right? You have post, put, delete, and get, right? Those are like the 4 super typical routes you'll have, right, that you can support. So in order for Next.js to know which one you should be supporting here, you need to export const get like this.
This is crazy to me. I love it, but it's crazy.
Isn't it weird? And let me just make sure I have the syntax for this right, because I was just, this is one of those things that I had been kind of like, okay, yeah, export. I'm just going to copy this real quick, but we can go in here. So export async function get. This is async that's on the server side. We could await some stuff. We can do something really simple, like just return like that, like a status with a 200. And we could make like a products array. And in the, yeah, we have like array ID, the name, maybe a description of it. I'm using Copilot, so, you know, that's why I'm flying through it. But, you know, as long as you kind of can get something here, that's all we really need. So this is super basic, but you could do whatever you want to do here, right? You could query a database. You could transform a file. You could do all sorts of things you can do on a server within here. We're just making this dummy data right here so we can actually query it. So this is going to be a GET request, as it's called GET. And if we named it post, then you can guess this would be a post request versus a put request or a delete request. So this name is really important. So it's typical that you'll have, I think it's actually the only thing, you can have one, and don't quote me on this one because I need to confirm this, but I'm almost certain you can only have one export from here per file. I don't think you could have two, because I can't imagine how that would really work. Actually, I guess you could. I guess you could have a get and a delete here, because you'd be calling them differently. So never mind. For the sake of this this little illustration here, we're just going to use a get request. So now we have a status, we have our products, and we can go here to our products page. So now I'm back at our main, I'm back at products. And in here, we're going to do what you typically see in a React app. We're going to do like a use effect, and we're going to use that use effect. We're going to fetch API / products. So we fetch, we get the response, we console log the data. You can probably guess what's going to happen here. What's the thing that I messed up on?
Well, where's my data state?
Oh, that's a good thing too. But even more fundamentally, use effect will not work here.
Because we're server-side rendering.
Server-side rendering. So we have to always make sure, which is lucky that Next just yells at you and tells you like, hey, what the heck? So you say use client, and it will work. So we have cat's ID. Let's go back to products page. Okay. And we have some sort of error. We have API products, and it's having some sort of internal error. Oh, I think that we need to actually return, we actually have to return a next response. So that was my bad. Return next response. So next response dot JSON, and we'll take the same stuff in here. We'll get rid of that.
Okay.
So what I had to do was, oops, and misspelled it, I think. Return next response. What it did was import next response and use the next response.json method to send back this array full of products and the status. And I think that'll work. I might have to refresh to see it work. Cool. And in here, I see we actually have some stuff. So now it's a matter of just rendering this stuff on the screen. So we can have like a use state here, or something like that. This is kind of stuff you probably are familiar with doing. So this is kind of where you get back to React land and you're like, okay, cool. Like I kind of get like what to do here. You can set state and things like that. So in here, we'll just set the products to data.products. And then we could do something kind of cool. We could have these products each go to their own page. But let's actually just render over these products. We'll do, products.map. And then we'll have product ID, description. Yeah, boom. And now you should see, hey, we have a list of really ugly looking products, right?
I think they're beautiful.
Okay, boom. We got something to look at though, right?
Yeah.
And to be honest, like this is kind of like the bare bones, the most fundamental parts of setting up a Next.js app and learning how to make a route, get some data, display it on the screen. I mean, really everything from there can get much more complex, but these are the basic fundamental things that you'll have to know.
So why, can we go back to the code?
Yes.
Why are we not, because you're starting with product is an empty array, so it's not airing. Okay, I normally don't use effect because I usually use a data loader with React router. So could we still get the data from the API without doing the client side, or would you only be able to do that if you were querying the database server side?
Yeah, so I think there's actually there's a pattern that I'm not as familiar with, but you could have the route, I believe, at the same under the page, and Next.js understands that route would then basically would not only serve the page but serve the data with the page.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why I'm so anti-use effect, but I just I hate use effect. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like use effect has become one of those things people avoid. It's funny because I haven't really written a use effect in a long time now because of using Next.js.
Well, that's what I was kind of thinking was going to be the benefit, because I do feel like React Router and the loader data, it gets kind of a lot. So I do love the idea that you could just query the database right from the page. Are we going to get to that in this demo?
We cannot. I mean, I don't have that set up, unfortunately, to do that. I was thinking, can I? But I thought that might be too error prone to show. But that would be like the next step I would do if I was anybody watching this. I'd be like, okay, cool. Like we did this using this way, but the whole point of really having it, like you've kind of pointed out, is like, why not just do it all on the server? Like why not just query, like use Prisma or use Mongo or use whatever. And then query some stuff and then display it on the page. You can just await it and then display the stuff and not do any use effect or anything like that, which I think is way more fun and the benefit of using it.
What about things like in Nest.js? I use a lot of auth guards and stuff like that. Is there built-in guarding on with Next?
I'm not actually sure. Can you give an example of the guarding?
Yeah, so if I have an API route that I only want an admin user to be able to use, I can create an auth guard that's kind of almost like middleware that intercepts the request and then make sure that you're logged in and your user before getting the data.
You could do something like that, but honestly, you'll just have to create your own middleware.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, and that's actually again, it's big on naming conventions. So you'd make a file like middleware.js. And that would be running every single request. Yeah. And middleware is not super. I mean, I'd have to look at the configuration, which I don't think people really want to see me do. But it's super simple. That was one of the first projects I did at work, was having some middleware to intercept certain requests that matched a certain pattern, and then decided whether or not to redirect people based on that pattern in something we could determine from the URL.
Very cool. All right. Yeah. I think you might be converting me. I'm very excited to try this out.
It's kind of cool. It's funny because it's like a front end framework in quotes, but it's kind of like a back end framework, really. I mean, everything is server side on default.
It seems like it takes a lot of complexity away. I'm almost trying to poke holes in it, and every time I try to poke a hole in it, I feel like you're coming up with a good answer. So
it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. I mean, the problem is sometimes there's this thin line which is not clear. You're like, wait, where does the client side? Because here's the other gotcha. Before I show you the last thing, which is layouts. which is the one big gotcha is server-side components and client-side components can be co-located, basically, or they can be used within each other. So you could have a server-side component which renders a client-side component, right? And that is where things get a little messy sometimes, because you can have things on the server which are sensitive, right? Sensitive data. And then that little thin line between that and the client, it's easy to see how things can escape to the client really easily if you're not careful, because it's not always clear which one is client-side rendered and which one is not, besides the fact you're using use client maybe somewhere. But there's nothing to really stop you from leaking sensitive data potentially, because it's just like all in the same place. It does, I think, require a little bit more like, okay, let me make sure I'm not letting things slip through props that I maybe shouldn't be. So bit of a gotcha there. And lastly, layouts. Oops, wrong one. So this is the last piece, which I think is pretty fundamental to using a NextJS app, and can be a little like confusing a bit. So these layouts are basically a component that wraps around the rest of the pages and components that are at the level it's at. So for example, products and page.js, they will all be wrapped in this layout.js. If we wanted a particular layout, a different wrapper for products, we could add a layout.js under products. Let's first experiment with this layout.js. This is where things like a footer might go, right? Like pretty common, like you have a footer or a nav. And this footer would be like, hey, this is your company, whatever. And you see your companies right here. Now, this is persistent across all pages. So we have it on this page, and then we have it on products at 1. Oh, no, we don't have it at products at 1. And that's because products at 1 would need its own layout. So this is a pretty cool way to wrap all your components in something. Like you might make a footer component and you wouldn't want to put it on every single page, for example. You can store things that are common at the layout. I'm actually a little surprised this didn't work.
Yeah, this is my first time. I don't love it.
Yeah, you know what? That was actually a bit of a surprise here. I'm going to copy this. This is an experiment here. I'm going to put this under products and just paste it in here and see what happens. Oh, now it doesn't like that, so I'm going to get rid of that. I don't care about the fonts. Come on, come on. And of course, there's all sorts of other little things like the fonts and all this stuff. Okay, well, that's kind of annoying. Oh, I know why, because it's doing all this junk. I don't want to do anything with local fonts at all. I didn't realize it actually downloaded fonts. Now look at that.
That is true. What? Okay, so maybe
I don't like what's going on there. And sometimes this can be from some aggressive caching that NextJS does. So let's just delete this layout and see.
It feels like the footer should be everywhere. Yeah.
It feels like it should just be everywhere. That'd be kind of weird if it wasn't. So let me.
There we go. Okay.
Now I'm happy. Okay. Now things make more sense. So now we have a footer every single place. And if we wanted to have a different footer, a different layout, that's when we would have it here. But we have a layout here. It's going to be persistent across all the pages.
So if I wanted a certain layout, like maybe I didn't want the footer in products, then I would just put it in every page other than products, or is there a way to not exclude this page?
That's one of the big issues I have with Next.js too, because the problem with something like this is you could use the path name, for example, and be like, here are the paths where I want you to show this versus this.
Okay.
But this is a server-side component. So the big problem with that is this gets cached, and it's not always going to be able to get you the, unless you just abandon the caching, then that's kind of pointless. So you could turn this to a client-side component, which then means everything rendered under it will be client-side. So that's when you get to these hairy things that I don't like so much, where you do things that you would normally be able to do easily in like a single page application, and you can say, give me the path name and I'll determine what I want to show depending on the path name. That becomes really, really difficult with Next.js in a server-side component.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
My next question would be, what about data passing between pages, and how does that work with Next.js? Are there any like easy tricks for that? 'Cause that's something I come up against with React Router.
Oh yeah, and then context. These are more like React, I think, problems than anything, because
Okay.
Next.js
Yeah.
doesn't really offer a way out of the box to do anything like that. It's more concerned with like the routing and the caching and all the other like servery things. But you have to depend on React to figure that out, or even Redux, or one of the many libraries that people want to use now for like global stores.
Okay. I was hoping Next just solved that problem because then I'd be a full convert because that's like my one. I
Right?
was like, I want a very easy way to pass state everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And no,
Okay.
there's not. And other than that, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's kind of, I think we got pretty far. I think next steps for people, if they wanted to continue with this, would be to, one, see how you could turn this from a client-side component to a server-side component and not do this fetch. And then there's a couple other little things we couldn't get to because they're a little bit more difficult. But things like when you have a server-side page and things update, the page doesn't automatically update like on a client-side page. So you can do some things where you revalidate. So for example, we go to our route here. This is just something for you to look up on your own, maybe, is where you can revalidate a path. And you could revalidate. This will say, hey, next, get this out of the cache. And then I want you to basically re-render that page. So you're not showing the old page. Maybe somebody clicked on an item and you want to update a cart on a server page. So when you want to show a page that has like some sort of dynamic content or something that has some user interaction, but even though it's on a server. So for example, on a server page, you could still do something like add an item to a cart, but you'd want to show that cart now has the item. When you do something like that with a server page versus a client-side page, you need to tell Next, hey, revalidate, take that out of the cache and revalidate the whole page so people can see the difference between the page that was there and the new page. Send a new page
Oh,
to
I
me.
like that. So, like for like, if you were adding something, you'd probably use a post request. Would you add the validate page at the end of the post request then?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that's one of those things that's a little harder to show within this time, and it's a little tricky, but it's another gotcha that I learned because I was like, wait, why the heck is my page not updating? And it was because you're using a server side page. You need to revalidate and bust the cache.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, this is really awesome. Thank you so much for giving us a demo of Next.js,
Thank
and
you.
you
That was
built a
fun.
whole full stack application in one go. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and then deploying it on Vercel is even easier. You like click a button and it's like boom, it's on Vercel. So
Is it bad that I almost feel like Vercel takes the fun out of it? Like there's just nothing like a struggle, like a fight with AWS. You know what I mean?
oh man, it's a good feeling when you get like a Lambda finally deployed or something. You're like,
Exactly, yes. I don't want to push a button. I want to like battle for my
I
application to
feel you.
show
Yeah, it's
up.
kind of funny. I'm like, this is way too easy just to put like a full stack app and like, yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Very
lackluster.
cool. Was there anything that you want to plug or any way for people to connect with you if they're watching this?
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, LinkedIn is always a good place to find me, Brian Jenney. And I have a pretty popular podcast actually. It's called the Develop Yourself Podcast, where I talk about mostly junior, early career focused people, like earlier career developer stuff, like getting hired and things like that. In fact, I got to tap you to come on there. That'd be really, I think it'd be a fun combo to have.
I love the name. The name sounds awesome. That was really clever of you.
I actually inherited it, so
Oh,
that's a
you
whole other
did?
story. Yeah, I inherited the name. Yeah, so I got the name and took it, and it's been really fun. It's been so great to like talk to people. So I hope people get a lot out of it. And yeah, that's a good. Those are two good places to connect with me.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we'll check out your podcast and your LinkedIn.
Hey, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. See you.